Hello students, I am Raghavan Kumar Singh, faculty of US Academy and Institute. Today we will discuss class 10th history's first chapter, the rise of nationalism in Europe. In 1848, Frederic Roze, a French artist, prepared a series of 4 prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republic, as he called them. Artists of the time of the French Revolution personified liberty as a female figure. According to sorrieu utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations identified through their flags and national costumes. In this chapter, we will deal with many of the issues visualized by sorrieu. During the 19th century, nationalism emerged as a force which brought about sweeping changes in the political and mental worlds of Europe. The end results of these changes was the emergence of nation state in the place of the multinational dynasties empire of Europe. A modern state in which a centralized power exercised centralized sovereign control over a clergy defined territories had been developing over a long period of time in Europe, but a nation state was one in which the majority of its citizens and not only its rulers came to develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. The diverse process through which nation states and nationalism came into being in 19th century Europe, the French Revolution, and the idea of nation. The first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. The political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of the French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. The idea of la patrie, the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen, emphasizes the notion of a united community enjoying equal rights under a constitution. The state general was elected by the body of the active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. Internal customs, duties, and dues were abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures was developed. Their activities related to the revolution further declared that it was the mission and the destiny of the French nation to liberate the peoples of Europe from despotism. Students and other members of educated middle class began setting up Jacobin club. Internal custom duties and dues were abolished and a uniform system was adopted. Their activities and campaign prepared the way for the French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and much of Italy in 1790. The French armies began to carry the ideas of nationalism abroad. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had, no doubt, destroyed democracy in France, but in the administrative field, he the principles or he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as the Napoleonic Code, did away with all privilege based on birth, established equally before law, and secured the right to property. Napoleon simplified administrative division, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. Transport and communication system were improved. Businessmen and small-scale producers of goods, in particular, began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weight and measure, and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to the another. In many places, such as Holland and Switzerland, Brussels, Mainz, Milan, Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed, the harbingers of liberty. It became clearly that the new administrative arrangement did not go hand in hand with political freedom. Increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of the Europe all seemed to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. Now, the making of nationalism in Europe. Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons, whose rulers had their autonomous territories. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. The Habsburg Empire ruled over Austria-Hungary. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half of the spoke a variety of dialects. Beside these three dominant groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire. The only tie bindings these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor, the aristocracy, and the middle class. Socially and politically, a landed aristocracy was the dominant class on the continent. The members of the class were by a common way of life that cut across regional division. Their families were often connected by ties. If marriages, this powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a small group. The growth of town and the emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. Industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in France and parts of the German states it occurred only during the 19th century. In its wake, new social groups came into being: a working class population and middle class made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals. It was among the educated liberal middle class that ideas of national unity following the abolition of aristocracy privilege gained popularity. Now, what did liberal nationalism stand for? In early 19th century, Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. The term liberalism derived from the Latin root liber, meaning free. Liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. It emphasized the concept of government by constant, a constitution and a representative government through parliament. The right to vote and to get elected was generated exclusively to property owning men. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. Women and non-propertied men and women organized a opposition movement demanding equal political rights. The abolition of state imposes restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. The merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duty of about 5% to each of them. Obstacles of economic exchanges and growth by the new commercial classes who argued for the creation of a unified economy. Territory allowed the unhindered movement of goods, people and capital. The Union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies for over 30 to 2. A new conservation after 1815. Following the defeats of Napoleon in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservation. Most conservatives, however, did not propose a return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. The modernization could in fact strengthen traditional institutions like the monarchy, a modern army, an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economy. The abolition of feudalism and serfdom could strengthen the autocracy monarchies of Europe. In 1815, representatives of the Europe power, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, who had collectively defeated Napoleon, met at Vienna to draw up a settlement of Europe. The Bourbon dynasty, which had been deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power, and France lost the territories it had annexed under Napoleon. General German Confederation of 39 states that has been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. Autocracy did not tolerate criticism and dissent, and sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocracy government. Now, the revolutionaries. During the year following 1815, the fear of expression drove many liberal nationalists undergo revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms and to fight for liberty and freedom. Giuseppe Mazzini, born in Geneva in 1807, he became a member of the secret society of the Carbonari. He was sent into exile in 1831 for attempting a revolution in Liguria. Mazzini believed that God had intended nation to be the natural unit of mankind. Secret society was set up in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland. Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemy of our social orders. Now, the age of revolution 1830 to 1848. As conservative regimes tried to consolidate their power, liberalism and nationalism came to be increasingly associated with the revolution in many regions of Europe, such as the Italian and German states. The provinces of the Ottoman Empire, Ireland, and Poland. When the French sneezes, Metternich once remarked, the rest of the Europe catched cold. An event that mobilized nationalist feeling among the educated elite across Europe was the Greek War of Independence. Greece had been the part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century. Greeks living in exile and also from many West Europeans who had sympathies for ancient Greek culture. Now, the romantic imagination and national feelings. The development of nationalism did not come about only through wars and territorial expansions. Culture played an important role in creating the ideas of the nation. In creating the ideas of the nation, art and poetry, stones and music helped to express and shape nationalism or nationalist feelings. Let us look at Romanticism, a culture movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalistic sentiments. Romantic artists and poets generally criticize the glorification of reason and science and focus instead on emotion, institution, and mystical feelings. Other romantic were other folk song, folk poetry, and folk dances that the true spirit of the nation. National feelings were kept alive through music and languages. Choral Kurpingsi celebrate the national struggle through his operas and music, turning folk dances like the Polonaise and Mazurka into nationalist symbols. Language too played an important role in developing nationalist sentiments. Now, the Russian language, which was imposed everywhere. Many members of the clergy in Poland began to use language as a weapon of national resistance. As a result, a large number of priests and bishops were put in jail or sent to Siberia by the Russian authorities as punishment for their refusal to preach in Russians. Now, hunger, hardship, and popular revolt. The 1830s were a year of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century saw an enormous increase in population. In most countries, there were more seekers of jobs than employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. Food shortage and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the roads. National Assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21, and granted the right to work earlier in 1845. Weavers in Silesia had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw material and gave them order for finishing textile. On 4th June at 2 p.m., a large crowd of weavers emerged from their home and marched in pairs up to the mansion of their contractors, demanding higher wages. The contractors fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. He returned 24 hours later, having requestioned the army. In the exchange that followed, 11 weavers were shot. 1848, the Revolution of the Liberals. The poor, unemployment, and starving peasants and workers in many European countries in the year 1848. A revolution led by the educated middle class was underway. Men and women of the liberal middle classes combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. They drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. Wilhelm IV, King of Prussia, rejected it and joined other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly. While the opposing of the aristocracy and the military became stronger, the social basis of parliament eroded. The issues of extended political rights to women was a controversial one within the liberal movement. Women had formed their own political association, founded newspaper, and taken part in political meeting and demonstrating. Women were admitted only as observers to stand in the visitors' gallery. Monarchs were beginning to realize that the cycles of revolution and repression could be ended by the granting concession to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries, the making of Germany and Italy. After 1848, nationalism in Europe moved away from the association with democracy and revolution. This can be observed in the process by which Germany and Italy came to be unified as nation states. Nationalism feelings were widespread among middle class Germans. This liberal initiative to nation building was however, expressed by the combined forces of the monarchy and the military, supported by the large landowners of Prussia. Prussia took on the leadership of the movement. Three wars overseen years with Austria, Denmark, and France ended in Prussian victory and completely the process of unification. The national building process in Germany had demonstrated the dominance of Prussian state's power. The new state placed a strong emphasis on modernizing the currency, banking, legal, and judicial system in Germany. Italy unified. Like Germany, Italy too had a long history of political fragmentation. Italians were scattered over several dynasties, states, as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. Italy was divided into 7 states. Italian language had not acquired one common form and still had many regional and local variations. Gossip Mazzini had sought to put together a coherent program for a unitary Italian republic. Young Italy from the dissemination of his goal. The failure of revolutionaries uprising both in 1831 and 1348 meant that the mantle now fell on Sardinia, Piedmont, under its ruler King's victory, Emmanuel II, to unify the Italian state through a war. Italy offered them the possibility of economical development and political dominance. Italy was neither a revolutionary nor a democrat. Italian population, among whom rates of illiteracy were high, remained blissfully unaware of liberal nationalism ideology, the strange case of Britain. The model of the nation or the nation state, some scholars have argued in Great Britain, it was the result of the long drawn out process. There was no British nation prior to the 18th century. United Kingdom of Great Britain meant in effect that England was able to impose its influence on Scotland. The British Parliament was henceforth dominated by its English members. Ireland was forcibly incorporated into the United Kingdom in 1801. British flag, the national anthem, the English language were actively promoted, and the older nation survived only on subordinate further on disunion. Now, visualizing the nation. While it was easy enough to represent a ruler through a portrait or a statue, in other words, they represented a country as if it were a person. Nation was then portrayed as a female figure. The female figure became an allegory of the nation. Christian Marine, a popular Christian name, which underlined the ideas of people's nation, the nationalism and imperialism. Nationalism no longer retained after the last quarter of the 19th century. After 1871, The most tensioned area was called the Balkans, a region comprising modern-day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro. Ottoman Empire made the Balkans region explosive, and all through the 19th century they strengthened themselves through modernization and internal reforms. Due to various conflicts, the Balkans became an area of intense conflict. During this period, instant rivalry built among the European powers over the trade and colonies, as well as naval and military might which led to a series of wars in the region and finally the First World War. In 1914, Europe was disastered because of nationalism aligned with imperialism. Anti-imperial movements were developed, but they all struggled to form independent nation states. But the idea of nation states were accepted as natural as well as universal